Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain today. Today we're working on Korean natural farming. We're going to be making what's called fermented plant juice, or FPJ. FPJ is a great tonic for plants when you apply it, because what you're doing is you're giving them an extra boost. So let's see how we do it. Okay, fermented plant juice, or FPJ, is one of the integral solutions used in Korean natural farming. And the whole point about FPJ is what you're doing is you're basically removing from some aggressively growing plants the growth tips of those growing parts of the plant, and you're fermenting them to remove auxins, cytokinins basically, or probably more in the roots, but other hormones, growth hormones, which on an aggressively growing plant such as this grapevine are really concentrated in probably the first 6 inches of the growing tip. This is where all the cell elongations and replications and things are really aggressively growing. The plant has moved a lot of nutrients and other things to these tips for growth. So what we're going to be doing is collecting probably about three pounds or so of these today. The growth tips of grapes is what we're working on today, and we're going to ferment them, and we'll show you how we do that with brown sugar. So the first step is we do this in the morning as early as possible when they're still dew, because at that point the plant has moved as much moisture as possible to the growing tips, as well as that's probably going to be the day's highest concentration of the hormones and auxins and other things that we're trying to get. So all we need to do is take the first 6 inches of each of these growth stems and just snip them off. Grapes are pretty prolific in terms of growing, so taking these growth tips off of this essentially wild group of grapes here isn't going to really hurt them that much. They'll simply resprout and grow again. So what we're going to do is do some collection. So you notice what I'm doing here is I'm taking the top tips and some of the leaves, usually about the first 6 to 10 inches of it. This is where all the activity is happening, right here in the tips. This is what we want. It's good stuff. They're growing strongest. The other thing is when you're making FPJ or any of these kinds of solutions, you want to take it off a healthy plant, because the healthy plant is really got all things working, and that's the whole idea, is you want to capture good stuff and not take it off a sick or anemic plant that's struggling. Also too, when making FPJs, you want to keep it species specific. So as an example, we're doing grapes today, but we're also going to make another solution that's going to be out of blackberry. Wild blackberry has aggressive growth, and so if we take off the tips of that, we should get that goodness that's growing, that's causing that plant to grow on as aggressively as it has. We'll be able to capture some of that. The idea is that if you're going to do this, that you want to keep it species specific, because there's different things in the different plants at different levels. So the idea behind it is capturing them individually, and then at the point in time when you actually have the fermented plant juice, the FPJ, you may end up mixing a little bit of one to the other at the final application when it's being put on the plant. But to have maybe different plants fighting each other during the fermentation process, you might not get as good as if you just kept to a single species on it. Another thing is when you're thinking about this is, well, why are you taking just the growth tips? If you ever noticed that when deer eat something, you ever notice what they do? They don't go after the older, more established, growth on the vegetation unless they absolutely have to. Their preferred is to go after these tips, and you go, well, of course they go after the tips because that's where the softest growth is. But they're not stupid. That's also where the nutrients are the densest. So they'll go after the growth tips, like on a rose as an example. If you notice a rose, when it puts out that nice new little flush of reddish kind of foliage on a soft stem, it's full of, vitamins and other types of things that the deer, that's where they get their nutrients. They don't eat the older leaves that much unless they absolutely have to. Now, again, deer, if you got too many of them, they're going to eat everything down to a nub. But the point is, their preferred is to do this. And there's a reason for it. This is where the nutrients are. Okay, we've collected about 3 to 4 pounds of material. Don't know for sure until we put it on the scale. But our next step is going to be to take this material, kind of slice it up a bit, chop it up so that it'll be in smaller pieces, and then we'll mix it in with the sugar, and we'll show that process in the fermenting. So let's go take care of that. Let's go to the next step. Okay, so we've got our cuttings. We've got roughly 5 pounds. This includes the stainless steel bucket. That's 1.5 pounds. So actually we have 3.5 pounds of growth tips from the grapevines. The next step, what we're going to do is we're going to mash these things down. Not going to really run it in a Cuisinart, but what we're going to do is we're going to chop it up. Take a little bit of time to do this, but we want this in small enough chunks that when we do the next step, which is putting the brown sugar in, that has more surface area exposed to the sugar itself. The whole idea is the sugar is going to use osmotic, basically osmosis, to pull the juices and etc. out of the stems and the growth tips. And it's a little bit of a fermentation, but what we're going to do is mix a 1 pound of sugar to 1 pound of the growth tips. So we're going to need about 3.5 pounds of sugar to mix up for it. So let's get these things chopped up. Just like chopping up salad, huh? Kind of like a sauerkraut thing. These tips are really juicy, so they cut very easy. They're not woody at all. And that's the whole point, is we want the material to be as fresh as possible, just about like a salad in a sense. I'm getting a little bit, maybe these parts here are just a little bit too big, but the whole idea here is we want this kind of all chopped up nice, as small as possible, and then we'll let materials, and that's pretty much how we'll chop it all up. A little smaller. Like I said, we're not blending it, we're not putting it into a blender or Cuisinart or anything like that. We're just chopping it to begin to crush the stems, crush the growth tips. And then what we'll do is we'll put this in another stainless steel container that we'll also have tear it out. And that's when we'll do the mixing of the sugar into it. Okay, the other stainless steel pot we're going to use is a little bit heavier. It's about 1.75 pounds. So we'll just keep that in mind, because we'll need to know that weight when we begin to mix the sugar. So let's just finish up our chopping. We got a lot of that to do. Okay, we got the material all finally chopped up. It's almost like it ran through a shredder, but not quite. And we tared the scale to the weight of this pot. And so we'll put the whole thing on to see how much we got. And we have 3.25 pounds. So that's pretty good. I'm going to be using 2 of these containers to mix it up, because what we're going to do now is the next step is, this is the part that starts the fermentation process. We're going to mix an equal part of the green material with the brown sugar. And that is going to be the basis for fermentation. Then the last step is, once we'll fill it up to pretty close to right near the top where this little lip is. And then we'll put another cap of brown sugar over the top just to kind of seal it. The idea is to keep Once these things start mixing with the sugar, a lot of moisture is going to come out of it, and stuff will tend to want to float. And the idea is we want to keep this green mass submerged in the liquid. And the idea is we could either use a brown sugar cap, or we could put a plate with a heavy, like high weight or something on it that would keep it pushed down. We want to keep it away from gathering any insects or fruit flies or anything of that nature. So that's why I'm going to basically go with the sugar cap. So let's get started. First thing we need to do is figure out what the weight of this empty container is. Then we'll start filling up. And we've got to remember that we have to fill it half with sugar. So we'll fill the container half, and then we'll see where we go from there. And it's by weight, not by volume. Remember that. Hopefully we can get a lot into each of these containers. I'm thinking at least 1.5 pounds. Yeah, that's perfect. That's 1.5 pounds. A lot of airspace in there. Okay, so we got 1.5 pounds there. Now we'll put in 1.5 pounds of brown sugar in it. Show you that it really does weigh 1.5 pounds. We're not using this sugar to eat, so it doesn't matter if I reach my dirty hands in there. The whole idea is that we want to get this up to about 3 pounds. Okay. So the idea of why you want to use 50-50 mixture by weight is if you go any higher, the chances are that osmotic pressure will be too great and you won't get the fermentation at all. And so now what we're going to do is just use our hand, and we're going to mix this thoroughly into the green so it's kind of evenly dispersed throughout. And what we'll notice as we do it, it's going to get wetter as we go. To make this easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my stainless steel pan over here, and then I'll pour it back into the container. So we know this is clearly a 50-50 mix. And what we're going to do is just continue to mix that brown sugar really well with all the green. And you just keep mixing it until you start to feel the moisture start to pull out. You'll know because it'll start to feel damp, and the sugar will start to turn to a darker color. And that's when you know that you got a really good mixture. So the idea is you just want to kind of keep kneading it with your hands, almost like making bread in a sense. Make sure it's all evenly dispersed and kind of pushed into the green. So it takes a few minutes to get it done. Oh, I can already start to feel the moisture coming out. It's also shrinking in volume too, so it's getting denser, which is interesting. I guess that would make sense if I'm pulling water out of the stems of things. So you can see already that it's starting to glisten up. Okay, we've mixed up the last half. It's really juicy, and so we're just going to load it into our container here and pat it down. Make sure we try to get rid of all the air spaces that we can. I mean, we're not trying to, make it, it's kind of like packing sauerkraut. This is amazing how much the volume has reduced itself. And we'll see, I think we'll get quite a bit of actual extract out of these guys. Now, one of the questions that people might ask is, well, this is all well and good, but what's the point of doing this? We are trying to find a way to help our plants, particularly during the summer. We have not the richest soil. We've been working on it for years, but I think we need to really step up the biology on things. And in some sense, what a lot of these Korean natural farming things are tonics to help the plant while the soil begins to strengthen itself. Because one of the other things, and we'll talk about this in other videos, is indigenous microorganisms. We tried to capture earlier this year that didn't work out, and I think that's because the weather wasn't cooperating with us. It was too cold. But we'll be doing that later this summer and see if we can make some in what they call IMO, or indigenous microorganism inoculant, and we'll be using that to help feed the soil as well as make good compost teas. But the point of doing something like this fermented plant juice is to help spray this on the plant. It's basically like a tonic. You're giving it a shot of maybe growth hormones and things that it was struggling to make. And the idea is if you strengthen the plant, it'll grow a better root system. It'll help extract more out of the soil itself. And it's just a way of aiding the plant during growing. One of the things that we have a problem with in our soil is available phosphorus and also calcium. We have calcium leaches out of our soil very rapidly. Our soil has a high magnesium level, so the ratio of calcium to magnesium is out of whack. So we use a variety of these as solutions as we're trying to implement the total Korean natural farming protocol. We've used water-soluble calcium phosphate to help balance out phosphorus and calcium in the plant. We've used, we don't make fish amino acids, but we have been using fish hydroslate, which is a close cousin to it, not exactly the same at all, but it's got similar properties. And then we use brown rice vinegar. Now we're going to be adding FPJ to our cocktail that we spray to help growing plants grow. And the last step we're going to do is oriental herbal nutrient, which in a sense is another form of another tonic. And those are herbal extracts also. This is the last step that we're going to do to get this into fermentation mode, is put a sugar cap of probably about a 1/2 inch over the top. So we want to clean the sides and the inside as far down as close as we can to this to make sure there's no sugar left, no plant material left that's stuck to the side, and that we've gotten rid of most of the air pockets. And then we'll pack that 1/2 inch of brown sugar down on it. Isn't it amazing? This is 3.5 pounds of grape shoots chopped up. Was a big bowl, and it was reduced with the sugar down to this. So in essence, we could have almost put in probably 5 pounds of chopped up grapevines. So anyway, we'll see how much actual liquid we get out of this. It'll take about 7 days. Leave it for about 7 days in a cool, dark place. Stay away from the light. We'll show putting a paper towel, rubber band thing over the top to allow it to breathe, because you got to remember, this is a living thing. This is fermentation. So there's going to be carbon dioxide getting off, and there's going to be, bacteria going to work to break down these guys and release those auxins and hormones and other growth things into the solution that's going to be what we're going to be extracting out of here. So let's do the final step, clean it up, and then put the cap on it. And we'll be sure to label it so that we know what we got going here. So I want to get that as clean as I can. It's not going to be perfect. We're not using any antiseptic. It's just damp paper towel to wipe it off, any excess sugar, stuff of that nature. Let that dry for a second. Maybe I'll use this drier paper towel. It's just going to help the process a little bit. Okay, now this is the part that's not an exact science. Basically, all we're trying to do is put about that much, which is about a half inch, maybe a little more, half inch to 3/4 inch over the top. And let's see if I've got a little scoop here I can use. Using my wife's kitchen, she's just use this here. What we're going to do is just kind of sprinkle this on the top. The idea is we want to get a cap. There we go. That is the process to get it started. This should take about 7 days on average room temperature. Being here in the Pacific Northwest, we're talking about somewhere probably 75 degrees. 70 to 75 degrees. If it's warmer, it may go faster, but if it's warmer, you really should try to find a cooler spot for it, because rapid biologic activity may not be as good as a slow, cooler fermentation taken over the 7 days. Think of it like making sauerkraut. If you've ever made sauerkraut or fermented vegetables, you want to put them in a darker place that's cooler to allow the fermentation process to take place, because that's essentially what's going on here. So this sugar is still porous enough to allow any carbon dioxide to get out. It shouldn't be anaerobic, at least not to the level that you would be getting harmful bacteria and things of that nature in it. What'll happen is they'll begin, the solids will begin to shrink down and liquid will begin to form. The solid will probably form a cake near the top. And when we get ready to release it, we're going to be discarding basically the sugar cap and the remaining solids. The objective is to go after the liquid, which is the fermented plant juice. And then at that point, we'll do another video on how to harvest it and how to stabilize it. Okay, last step, we'll just put a paper towel over the top. And that just keeps critters from getting into it. Then we'll use a rubber band over it to kind of attach it down. And the whole idea of the paper towel is it's still breathable. It doesn't have to be a paper towel, it's just that's the convenient thing to do for us. But any paper that's breathable, or any, like a nylon mesh or something of that nature, do the same thing. The whole idea is you want to keep stuff from lying around, landing on the sugar or anything of that nature, and still allow gas to move in and out. So let's talk a little turkey about why are we doing this crazy stuff. Kind of touched on it earlier. One of the things is about plant health. What started us on this journey is we were doing a lot of work with trying to get more calcium back in our soil and things of that nature. But we were still getting a lot of insect damage, and in some cases plants failing to thrive. And so we're looking for a variety of information that would help us move the needle on that. And so this is an experiment for us. We discovered Korean natural farming through a friend of ours, Danny Graham, and she has been working on it on her own farm for the last year or two. And so we did some more research into it. And we'll put some links down in the show notes to, this is actually a lot of work's been done in Hawaii. It started in Korea with a Master Cho, who is the guy who developed this back in the 1960s. And what we're trying to do is see if we can use these techniques to enhance our plants as they're growing so that they have less bug damage and less disease. We're still, even after years of no-till and trying to get, trying to get things optimized in the soil standpoint, we still have issues. So we're trying this out to see if it's going to take us to the next level. So next video, we'll be doing this in 7 days. So this video is coming out this Thursday, which would be Independence Day, July 4th. And so we'll have a follow-up video probably around on the 11th. That'll show us harvesting the FPJ and what we do to stabilize it. I want to thank you for watching today. And if you like what you see, please hit the thumbs up, as well as leave a comment if you have one. Also, too, be sure to check out our other playlists. We have lots of other topics out there. And also, I want you to all have a good day.